So you want to be an author, learn about the fabulous world of writing, editing, publishing, and eventually swimming in a pool filled with money, Scrooge McDuck style, from a recently published author on this episode. Hello, and welcome to the ExploreVM podcast. Today's episode, we are going to talk with somebody who's actually sat through and done the process of writing an IT book. Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa. You might know me better as VMIS on the Twitters. I am the author of IT Architect series The Journey, which previewed at VMware 2017. And I'm excited to be here tonight. I actually recorded an episode with you at VMworld as well, so I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, I was looking at some of my stats from last season and seeing which shows did well, and I was like, we should do a whole episode on the topic of writing a book. I know there's a lot of aspiring bloggers and, just general content contributors out there in our community, and you hear some of them, they kind of romanticize about writing a book, or they think they want to, or they see the names in the book and they really put these people high up, on these pedestals. Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us about the down and dirty? What is it actually like to write an IT book?
Wow, I don't even know where to start with that one. It's a pretty broad topic.
Okay, well, why don't we start with the first question of what made you want to do this? Were you approached by somebody, or did you come up with this idea on your own?
So that's like a multi-part answer. I've wanted to write a book since I was a child. It's always been on my list of things to do. There's something called NaNoWriMo, which is National Write a Novel Month in November. You write 50,000 words in 30 days. I've done that a couple times, but that's never really seen the light of day. It's just something I did for myself. And I always kind of said, okay, one day I'm going to write that book for real. And it was actually the week before I was defending my VCDX that Mark from the IT Architect series reached out to me. It was kind of like, hey, have you ever thought of writing a book? And I said, yes, absolutely. But can we talk next week after this is over? Because I really didn't even want to think about it at that point. I was so focused on my defense and all that kind of stuff. So Mark and John approached me about their IT Architect series. And we just kind of went from there. And it happened.
So when he approached you, did he have a topic in mind? Or were you kind of coming up with something? Or did it just kind of after conversations with him, did your topic for the book kind of come together?
He didn't have a topic in mind. We were just kind of chatting about it back and forth a lot. And I had written this blog post right after I got my VCDX that I called The Journey to VCDX 236. They both said that blog post was a great topic and it's really something that you should consider expanding because you're clearly passionate about it. And it's something that could actually help a lot of people who want to do their own IT architect journeys. So I thought about it for a little while, and I decided, this is the one, this is the thing, this is the book I'm finally going to publish.
All right, so you've got your topic. Now where do you begin? Did you go in a linear fashion, or did you kind of write down ideas as they came together, or did you double back on that blog and kind of build off of that? How did you start your process?
This is going to sound kind of like grade school here, but I started with an outline. And the outline I ended up with at the end of when I wrote this book was nothing like when I started. Once I said my outline was final, and I'm doing little air quotes with my fingers right here, I turned on track changes every time I edited it, and I went from there. So I started with the outline, and I didn't actually write the chapters in order. I just kind of went with what felt right to do at that time or what I felt particularly inspired of. And I didn't even write a whole chapter, then another whole chapter. I jumped around. I was usually working on 3 or 4 chapters at a time. And just to kind of give you a idea, I started my outline in December. I started writing the book in January, and I was done by Memorial Day weekend because I wanted to make sure I made that publication date of VMworld 2017. So I didn't write it fast because writing a book takes time, but it was definitely very intense, and I put a lot of time and effort into it, usually at night. So I wrote most of this book at night, and my joke to myself was, okay, once you have 5 typos in one sentence, you're done for the night, and you need to just go to bed now.
Yeah. So with that shortened time frame, how much time Was it a lot of time in the evenings? Obviously, we're
Yep,
working
it was pretty much
professionals.
nights and weekends.
Nights and weekends.
Nights and weekends. Mostly nights. Some
Okay.
weekends.
And then I'm assuming you have to have family buy-in to be able to dedicate that time.
Oh
Oh,
yeah, it was almost good I was coming off of VCDX because I did have that family buy-in. My mom has always been one of my champions and best friends and now one of my biggest helpers. So coming off of that VCDX, I was like, there's kind of this one more thing I really want to do, and we said let's just go for it and do it. And my parents were really great. Eric was really great. Everybody was really great and supportive. And you really need that buy-in, whether it's VCDX or a certification or a book, anything that's going to consume you like that, you need to make sure everybody in your life is aligned with it.
with spending so much time night and day working, writing, spending your weekends doing your family stuff, you had to come up with some writer's block at some point. What did you do to get through that? What did you do to look for, I don't know, inspirations or something to help you get past that writer's block?
So what I did and what I would tell other people to do are probably two different things. Let me tell you what I did. Because I was on such a tight timeline, I really didn't let myself get writer's block. So if I was working on, chapter 5 and I just got stuck on chapter 5, I would go write chapter 6 or 7. That's why I kind of mentioned I was working on a multiple chapters at once. So when I got stuck on one, I would go work on another one. The advice I would probably give to someone would be a little different. I would tell someone else, just go do something different. Don't write, go read something, maybe not technical, maybe, some fun, fluffy book or something, but go do something else to make yourself think differently. Because I noticed when I would step away from something I was struggling with for a while, I would get ideas later and things would become clear after I kind of put it down for a while. It's something that's always worked for me. Like, go do something else. In this case, I'd be writing another chapter, but that's not what I would tell people to do. Don't do as I say, not as I do. But after stepping away for a while, it would make sense, or I'd figure out a way to phrase it or do whatever. So that would be kind of my advice for that.
Within the writing process, obviously there's editors involved. When you finally had content you thought, this is where I'm going, what was the editing process like to have somebody actually critique your work, look it over, and potentially criticize what you had spent so much time and effort into?
It was an interesting process, and I think I was almost my biggest critic because I would read my own work later, right? I'd read whatever chapter I wasn't working on. I'd be like, why do I use this word so much? I keep on saying so, stop saying so, something like that. But it was really helpful to have reviewers do the same thing. So Mark and John were kind enough to kind of lend me their pool of reviewers. So the people they had review their book, they shot out an email and said, hey, we have a new book coming up in the series. So I got lots of great feedback. Probably the best one I got from a technical writing perspective thing was Renee, VCDX 133. He was just like, stop using contractions. I was just full of contractions. I don't know why I did that, but for some reason I did. So that was something I fixed. And a lot of people had, good examples or good things to think about. And, here you made a plural and it shouldn't be in caught, little things like that. So I went the reviewer route. I didn't send it out for copy editing or anything like that. But with my reviewers and my mom, she also looked over things for me. She's a very good English person. She used to mark up my papers with red pens in middle school and high school and all that good stuff. And I attribute her doing that to why I'm such a great writer today. But, I had a lot of people helping me out, and it was tough. No one really came out and said, hey, this sucks, this book is horrible, because, I hope it wasn't. I don't think anybody told me it was. But, it's always hard to put yourself out there and have people read it. That's why I've always written these NaNoWriMo books and just kind of kept them to myself, right? No one's ever read this, 50, 60,000 word fluffy science fiction thing I wrote. So that was new for me. I kind of was used to it from blogging, putting myself out there, but this was just on a whole nother level, especially because this book was so personal and intimate. It was about my journey to becoming an IT architect. So it was good. Overall, it was a really good experience, and I'm glad I went through it and kind of put myself out there for other people to see and hopefully learn from.
I will say, for full disclosure, I was asked to review a few chapters. I honestly, in that process, I was honored because I was like, wow, this is to be part of the writing process, to actually, pick apart somebody's work. And I'm like, I'm not smart enough to do this. So I hope
Yes, you are.
my
Everybody is smart
feedback was
enough to do
useful.
this. It was, and there's no such thing as you're not smart enough to do this, right?
Right.
It's a big learning thing. I think I improved as a writer dramatically just writing the book, right? I do a lot of writing. I always say that there's going to be a year I'm going to pick and I'm going to record how many words I write in a year, and I've never done it. And I missed 2018. I'm not doing it now, maybe 2019. But even just, having people like you critique my work, I learned a lot about myself as a writer. And, it was a good experience. I love to write. It wasn't my longest thing I've ever written either, believe it or not, which sounds crazy.
Well, and back to your point about contractions, that's a trick I picked up in high school to make my word count for my English papers. Um,
Oh, that's a good one.
yeah,
I don't know. Like, I'm usually very proper with the English. I don't know when I started writing with all the contractions, but that was definitely something I took and I really tried to make an effort to stop doing. There's one thing that I think, like let's and don't. I had a couple of those in there, certain places, because sometimes it just didn't flow to say let us or do not.
right.
Those are the two I struggle with sometimes, but like they are there, like that kind of stuff.
A little off topic, but we're talking about English and using words. Conversation in one of the Slack channels today was, what is the past tense of troubleshoot?
Ooh, I would say I was troubleshooting. I would probably do it that way.
Okay. Yeah,
I
I
was troubleshooting, or he was troubleshooting, she was troubleshooting. What troubleshot? That doesn't make any sense, really. Did we
it's
try looking it up? Did anybody try looking it up?
Merriam-Webster has it as troubleshot.
Really?
Yes.
See, that's a weird one. I wouldn't think that made sense.
It,
Well,
it,
do we really want to ask what the past tense of tweet is? Like, that's another one that, like, I don't even want to go there.
right. Yeah, I personally I use had performed troubleshooting.
Yeah,
I
something
try to
like
make a
that.
sentence out of it instead of just trying to flip it into a single
I'm gonna
past
have
tense
to
word.
tri slip a troubleshot in there in some blog post or something now after this conversation.
Yeah, the agreement was troubleshot is dictionary defined the proper word, but if you want to sound extra nerdy, you say troubleshot.
Sounds good.
All right, now on to everybody's favorite part of writing a book, publishing and working with publishers. In the IT world, I think we're all aware of a few major publishing houses.
Hmm.
Some of them are not so great to work with if you've listened to people. Some of them are absolutely fine. What approach did you take?
I followed the approach of Mark and John in the IT Architect series. So while it's technically self-publishing, we're working with a self-publisher and, purchasing a package where they do the layout and the design and all that stuff. And honestly, if I were to do it again, I'd probably do it all myself because I know I'm capable of it. But with that timeline, having never done it before, I wanted it to look good. I was a little nervous, so I just kind of went with the flow. That was definitely an experience. I will say that. Not good or bad. It was just, a learning experience. And I literally had to ship the books to Scott Bollinger's house in Las Vegas because that's how close I was to not making VMworld. Like that's how close it came. And I felt like if I would have had control of it, maybe I would have still come that close, but at least I was in control. Like I was just at these people's mercy, right? Because you signed some contract of like, you get it when you get it, but we'll try to get it for when you want it. So it wasn't a good or bad experience, but I think going forward, I could definitely do it myself. And it's funny because I read a book right after VMworld called, hold on, let me find it real quick on my iPad. It was called Content Inc. by Joe Pulizzi Joe Pulizzi. And he's the founder and CEO of the Content Marketing Institute. And his book about content, it was a really good read. And one thing he suggested, actually, which I did not do, was start with an ebook so you have that opportunity to refine it and get it the way you want it, and then go to print. So I did everything at once, right? So I wrote my book, I locked and loaded it, and off to the publisher. They did the design and layout, and now I have my locked book. And if I want to go make changes to that in the current state, it's really going to be a pain. So I think if I did another book, I would probably go the ebook route first, get it how I want it, go through a couple revisions, and then maybe go to print. Or maybe I would just do something like Create Space and just do everything myself, kind of on demand, change it when I want, and not worry about, having to get other people involved and incur additional cost in doing layout and changes and all that kind of stuff.
Now, out of my curiosity here, what does the self-publishing process look like? How does one go about doing that?
So I think the first thing to do before you even, think about self-publishing and how to physically do it is to write your content, right? Get your content done, get it to a place where you're happy. Maybe you're still doing revisions, but get the bulk of it done and go from there, right? So after you have your manuscript, first you have to find a self-publisher. There's a bunch of them out there. Amazon has a branch called CreateSpace. The one I used was Lulu. They're all over the place. And the thing to remember is that there's a cost incurred with self-publishing, right? It's not free. Something's going to cost you somewhere along the line. And then it's kind of how much do you want to do yourself, right? So there's a couple of main components to your physical book and your ebook for that matter. There's your cover, so you're going to need some kind of artwork and design for your cover. There's your layout and design. So how do you want your book to look? What font is it in? What's the header on every chapter? That kind of stuff. And then there's the editing. Like, do you need editing? Do you need someone to go through and check your grammar and your spelling and all that kind of stuff? So those are the things you need to be concerned about, and how you do them is up to you, right? So you might know someone who can do your editing for you, or you might go my route and say, okay, I'm going to have a bunch of people review it, and someone who's a little more English focused review it too, and that's good enough for me for editing. Other people might not be comfortable with their writing and might want something a little more involved. And then the layout and design, you honestly can do it in Word. There's so many templates out there that, here's your Word template for your book, have at it. But most of the professionals use Adobe InDesign. I think it's InDesign. Yeah, InDesign. And there's also an open source software package. The one I started playing with was something called Scribus, something like that. So there are a couple different ways to do layout. I would like to learn Adobe InDesign at one point, I think, but now was definitely not the time for me with my timeline, right? So how much time is it going to take you to do that formatting, line up everything? Because then it kind of cascades, right? So you make one change here, you swap out an image, and it kind of cascades through. Another piece of advice I just thought of when we're talking about formatting is when you're writing your book, every chapter should be its own Word document, right? So every chapter is its own Word doc, and at the end, then you merge them together. That's because, like I said, this formatting can be a big pain, and you don't want to have to keep doing it over and over again. So write your separate chapters, put them together at the end, and then do your formatting instead of, messing with things throughout the whole thing. And I changed chapter 5, and now I messed up chapter 6 and all that kind of stuff. The other thing to think about self-publishing then is distribution itself, right? Are you going to do print copies, or are you going to do ebooks, and how are you going to distribute them? Like Lulu has a web store, so I sell my book on the web store, and I sell it on the iBook store right now. And then there's all sorts of things you can do for distribution in bookstores and Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that kind of stuff. So I would say, there's a lot of great blog posts out there on self-publishing. Go read some of them. Figure out what vehicle you're going to use, whether it be, Lulu, CreateSpace, whatever have you, and research them, right? And research them. Because like I said, this isn't exactly free, and you want to try to optimize what you're getting and what cost you're going to pay for it, right? Because if you go and have someone do your design and formatting for you, there's a cost for that. And different providers charge different amounts. And then remember, when you print your book, so let's say I want to bring 60 copies to VMworld or whatever have it, that book will have a base cost to produce, and the paperback is always cheaper than the hardcover, I guess, because it costs less to make a paperback than a hardcover. So that's a little thing to think about. Do you want to do paperback and hardcover, because those are separate layouts? And then ebook layout is a whole different beast than the print layout. So there's a lot of things to think about when you're going that route. I think it's something that everybody can do, quite honestly. That's why self-publishing is taken off so much, right? This is all accessible. We have the internet in front of us. There's all these blogs, there's all these knowledge-based articles. It's something everybody can do. And I'm not going to lie, the first time is rough. So the best thing you can do is find someone who's done it to guide you through the process and kind of show you where the gotchas are and help you along the way. That's definitely one of the biggest things a new author could do, is find someone who's been through the process and get them to kind of coach you through it.
So when it comes to writing a book, how similar or different is it to the process of writing blogs? As I'm sure a lot of bloggers listening have thought about making that step?
I'm going to give you the classic IT answer before I go into detail, and it depends. Are you used to writing long form blogs, or are you writing 300-word blog posts? Are you writing series already, or is every blog post on an island on itself? If you're used to writing series and longer blogs, it's not that big of a stretch, but a book is so much longer than a blog post, right? Even a chapter is so much longer than a blog post. One of the things I did in my book is I had kind of distinct portions of every chapter, right? So I always ended every chapter with some sort of piece of general advice for your IT architect journey. And honestly, it's all stuff that you can kind of take anywhere in life. So in the first part of the book, it was called Before We Go. So before you start your journey, here's what you're thinking about. And each chapter ended that way. And later on in the book, it changed to we're on our way when we're learning more, and so on and so on. And then, certain chapters had formats, but that was one of the hardest parts, is figuring out how do I format the chapter, right? Not from like a word layout perspective, but like, what do I want to convey and how do I organize the information? When I was introducing some of the areas an IT architect needs to be concerned about in the book, I started off with talking about the area, right? So for example, networking. So I would start by talking about networking, and then I would talk about why you care about networking. So why is this so important to an IT architect? And if you weren't convinced then, I would have a section called What Could Possibly Go Wrong? Let's say I decide I don't care about networking. What's going to happen to me? Coming up with that structure I was going to use for the different infrastructure areas of expertise and architectural building blocks, that was hard for me. That was the big thing, because I wanted to be consistent, right? I knew I have to talk about these topics over and over again, so how am I going to present them? So it's little nuances like that are different than a blog, because you don't necessarily write the same blog post over and over again. And it's almost like one chapter of my book, when I introduce these infrastructure areas of expertise, it's almost like, a bunch of blog posts put together, because each topic really could be its own blog post, but it's all in the same chapter in a book. So from a writing perspective, it's not that much of a stretch, right? I always believe that writing is a muscle. The more you write, the better you're going to get at it. So if you're out there blogging, you're clearly already flexing those muscles, so it's not that big of a stretch to go write a book. But you can't look at it like, I'm going to sit down and write a book tonight, right? You start with your outline, like I mentioned, and you decide what's going into each chapter. And within each chapter, you figure out what the flow is going to be and how it's going to be formatted, in the sense of how the information is going to be presented to the reader. And you go from there. So it's kind of like a bunch of blog posts are put into a book. And some of the blog posts might be how-to blog posts, and some of the blog posts might be more thought leadership blog posts, and all the different type of blog posts you write will probably end up in this book somewhere. So if you're an established blogger and you want to take that next jump, I just want you to let you know that you absolutely can. It's very daunting at first, but bite off little chunks and go from there.
The question that is on every aspiring author's mind: how many Teslas have you purchased from your royalties? Because clearly IT authors make the big bucks, right?
I was going to buy this Tesla, and it was beautiful, and it was red, but it got shot into space. So I haven't been able to buy a Tesla. I was going to, get the change from under the sofa and be like, hey, Elon, hook me up. But that didn't work out for me.
Use Tesla, slight orbital damage?
Yeah, I was hoping maybe with slight orbital damage, you'll get a discount, but honestly, it would probably go for a premium.
Mm-hmm. So this is not a get-rich proposition.
No, and if, I will say that probably self-publishing, the publisher's not taking as big of a cut as if it is with a big publishing house, so you could make a little more money, but, no one's going to retire on a book unless I go and write out like 50 Shades of IT Infrastructure and they make it into movies and everybody loves it. And maybe I should do that. What do you think? Should that be my next book? Like, maybe I can start the next wave of that movie, because the third one's coming out, right? So
I think 50 Shades of IT could be quite the interesting series, depending on which way you took that.
There's actually a Twitter account. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like 50 Shades of Nerd or something like that. And they tweet all these really nerdy, funny things, like in the context of the book.
So logically, the next step is to publish a book.
Of course.
The reality is, one doesn't get rich by writing a book. That's not going to take off. That's not going to be a New York Times bestseller. A technical book in our field, a few people are going to enjoy, several people are going to enjoy, find useful. It's nothing you're going to retire on. That being said, with everything you went through, the writing, the editing, the publishing, would you do this again?
I would. I would, but I think I would take a different approach. Like I mentioned, I read that book, Content Inc., after I published this book. So I'd probably start with maybe an ebook, refine it a couple times, and then go to print. I would definitely do everything myself next time instead of, paying for services to do formatting and stuff for me. And I wouldn't put myself in such a time crunch. I mean, it worked out. I think the reason why it worked out so well, like me saying, okay, I'm going to write a book in 5 months or however ridiculous time it was that I was coming right off of ECDX, right? So I was used to putting all that extra time into everything. So I think that's why it worked for me, because I kept going, right? I didn't take a break. I didn't stop. I just rolled right into the next thing. So I was used to, that dedicated time every night and on weekends and all that kind of stuff. So it worked for me. If I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to write a book in 5 months again, I probably could. But I think it would be a little harder to ramp up. Like I didn't have any ramp up time. I didn't need to because I was already in that mode. And I think any advice I would have to people, who are writing their next book or a new one is take your time, right? And that's hard with this industry because, things change so much. Like my book, I didn't really mention too many specific technologies, right? I talked about networking, I talked about virtualization, I talked about servers, but it's not like I talked about vSphere 6.5. I think that's one of the hard parts about being in our industry and writing technical books is the material changes so very fast, which is another reason I think that ebook first approach might be better to take for some people. It might be quicker to get out the door. And then maybe you spin it around and put it into a print format in a place like, CreateSpace or Lulu, where it's very easy to get it out there, right? You're not stuck in months of bureaucratic red tape with a big publishing house or anything like that. Self-publishing can definitely decrease the time to market for an author, I would say, provided you can either pay a lot of money to people to do it really fast, or you can just buckle down and do it yourself.
Well, my next question was going to be, do you have any advice for aspiring authors? But I think
I have so much advice for aspiring authors.
Well,
where do I start?
feel free to continue. Feel free to continue. The floor is yours.
It's funny you ask me that because a lot of the advice I'm going to give is probably in my book in the form of here's how to become an IT architect. But one of the things I stress in my book is these lessons that you learn becoming an IT architect, you can take them and apply them to almost anything in your life. So for example, writing a book. And I think a lot of the lessons I learned as an IT architect, I did put into place when I went to go write that book. So the first thing I tell everybody to do in my book, if you're going to be an IT architect, is get yourself like a notebook or a journal or something. And if you want to write a book, go get a notebook. I have like 3 notebooks full of stuff from when I wrote my book. I have 4 notebooks full of VCDX stuff. Go get a notebook and start brain dumping ideas, right? Like, what do you want your book to be about? And maybe you can't decide right now. Maybe it's, I think this topic is good. Paul, give me some random IT topics. I'll incorporate them into my advice. Just
NVMe.
NVMe. So maybe you want to write a book on NVMe, or maybe you want to write a book on vSphere. But you find that as you start, researching NVMe or vSphere or whatever have you, like you're not really into it, right? Write about what you're passionate about. Don't write something because you're like, well, there's not a lot in this space right now. So if I write like the best NVMe book ever, I'll be the first one out the door and a lot of people will buy it. But, oh man, NVMe is so boring. Don't write that book. Don't. You have to be passionate about it because it's about to become a huge, huge, huge part of your life. So take your time and brainstorm to come up with your book idea. Once you have your idea, take a couple weeks to come up with that outline I told you about. That's going to change over and over again when you write your book, but you need a starting place, right? So when I started my book, I actually had less chapters than I ended up with. And I found as I wrote my book that they kind of naturally lended itself to 3 different parts, actually 4 different parts if you include the appendices. So that was something that evolved as I wrote the book, and it just like kind of fell into place for me. So start with an outline, but no, it's going to change and evolve as you write. And you might find out that your book is about something a little different than you thought it would be. So let's say you started out with writing a book about how to use host profiles, but it turned out to be a book about how to use host profiles and how to use Power CLI to configure ESXi hosts. Like, let's say you expanded what you were going to write about. Nothing wrong with that. And the other piece of advice I would say, after you've got your content down, you feel like it's in a good place, and you send it to reviewers, there's going to come a point where you have to lock and load it. You have to say, this is version 1.0 of my book. This is it. No more changes. I'm going on to formatting. I'm going on to editing. I'm going on to the publishing process. And if you're hesitant to do that, or if you're writing about a topic that's evolving very, very rapidly, maybe you look at that ebook model first, right? Maybe you start with an ebook and you get it out there, and you wait 6 months and then do another rev of the ebook or something like that. Or you use a self-publishing house where you can quickly and easily upload a new manuscript and have it, go to the printer in 3 days or something like that. The technology you pick might actually help you decide part of the publishing process if it's going to be, important that you are able to constantly revise this work. What other advice would I give? If you go the print route or even the ebook route, when you actually read the book for the first time, and I don't mean read your Word document or your PDF, when you actually read your ebook or crack open that book and read it for the first time, and it's hard to do, like you're almost like, I don't even want to read it at this point because I've been sleeping and breathing it for I don't know how long. There's just something so cool about that. Like when my printer copies showed up in the mail and I held them in my hands, I was just like, I can't believe I did this. Like, this is really, really great. And just, like I said, with becoming an IT architect, enjoy the journey of becoming an author, right? Don't hesitate to reach out to people who have done it. This IT community is full of people like myself that have written books. Reach out to them. Brainstorm with them, ask them what they did with the process and how they published and what they liked and what they didn't like. And you can never really get too much advice from people. Actually, when I was first in SE many years ago, I can't believe how many years ago that was, but when I started out as an SE, that was my first vendor role. I was new to the vendor world. One of the things I did was every question I had, I asked like 3 or 4 different people, and everybody gave me a slightly different answer, right? Because we all have our own experiences and preferences and all that kind of stuff. So from the multiple answers and perspectives I would get, I would kind of craft my way of doing things. And writing a book is exactly the same way. Like, I'm sitting here telling you, you know what, go self-publish, do it all yourself, blah, blah, blah. But someone else could be like, no, you need to find a big publisher, and you need to have an editor, and you need to have people do your formatting for you. And, you might get different feedback, and a lot of it might come to your own comfort level with things. I would say, don't be afraid, right? It's nerve-wracking to write a book. It's nerve-wracking to put yourself out there like that. People are going to invest their time and money in something that you created and you wrote. And it's a lot different than if it was like a white paper you wrote for your employer or whatever. This is just different. And I don't know how else to say it other than that. Like, can't tell you how many documents I wrote that are out there that people use to build their infrastructures, but writing this book was completely different on so many levels.
Throughout this whole interview, we have discussed your book. That's why you're on this podcast. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your book, where people can purchase it should they want to, whether it be physical copy or ebook.
I wrote a book? What?
I'm pretty sure it's on my shelf.
Didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I gotta say, even now, I'm still kind of shocked I wrote a book, right? Because like I said when we started this is something I've wanted to do most of my life. My book is called IT Architect Series: The Journey. It's part of the series that was started by Mark and John, some of the early VCDXs. My key focus of the book is giving aspiring IT architects the tools they need to become an IT architect, and really for others who aren't sure if they want to become an IT architect or if they're going to work with IT architects. Like, let's say you're a CIO or a CTO and you want to understand the role of an IT architect, that kind of stuff. A lot of people might not actually know what an IT architect does if they haven't encountered one yet in their career. So it's really a guidebook for anyone interested in it, no matter what the level, no matter what your experience is. If your experience is your first job out of college or you're a seasoned professional, I think this book will be really helpful for you. One of the other things I did in this book, besides focusing on IT architecture, as I mentioned earlier, is I tried to just include lessons I've learned throughout my life and my career for everybody. So, like I said, I end every chapter with some piece of advice I've learned. And the lessons you've learned during your IT architect journey in this book, you can take pretty much anywhere in life. Like I said, I took my IT architect journey lessons and turned it into this book. So you can take them to your next job or your next endeavor, or whatever it may be. You can find me on Twitter at VMIS33, and you can find the book on Twitter at ITArchJourney. And the book's website is itarchitectjourney.com. One of the things I'm working on is trying to launch kind of a blog companion to it. When I find, great learning articles or good resources, like I'll post this podcast there and talk about it. So I'm trying to kind of build a community around this too, to kind of get aspiring IT architects to help each other out, because the journey isn't one you take alone. We all know this. There's so many people involved who you meet along the way. So I want people to be able to reach out to each other and talk about the book. You can also find my website at vmis.net. And I do have a couple posts on there talking about the book, mostly in the context of, some of the lessons I've learned and planning things. Or I actually have my IT architect journey post that inspired this book, The Journey to VCDX 236, on that website as well.
And for those curious, what was the first book in the series about? And is there a book after yours yet, or is that still in the works?
So the first book is called The Art of Infrastructure Design. It's written by Mark, John, and Chris. John is VCDX 1001. Mark is 23 and Chris is 79. So a lot of people kind of refer to this as like the VCDX book, right? Because it's written by 3 VCDXs. It takes you through a lot of the logic and the process and all the things that you might not have known that it takes to become an IT architect and take that holistic look at everything. The second book is Designing Risk in IT Infrastructure by Damon Bear, and that's kind of a really good book, just focusing purely on risk and what it means to enterprises. And then my book is number 3. If you go to their website, which is itaseries.com, you can kind of learn more about all the different books in the series.
All right. Well, I just learned something because I did not know that there was a second book before yours.
Yes. Actually, we came out at the same time pretty much. But
oh, okay.
He's 2, I'm 3, which is good because I like the number 3 a lot. So I'm like, all right, I'll be the third book in the series. It's like my thing, VMIS 33, right? So I like 3s.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I think this is going to be a very informative episode for our listeners. And you've mentioned it a few times in here, but where can people find you online, and do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Sure. The best place to find me online is my Twitter at vmis33 or at my website, vmis.net. As for parting words, I think the lesson to be learned from this podcast, because I'm big on learning lessons in the IT architect journey, is that you can do this. You can write a book. If it's something you're passionate about, you have the skills. It's a matter of breaking it down into small pieces to make it seem less overwhelming at first, because it can be overwhelming at first to kind of take on a goal like this, just like it could be to get that next certification or get a VCDX or get a new job. But these are all things people do all the time, just like writing a book is. So if you want to do it, you can. Start small, start with your idea, start with your outline, and don't hesitate to reach out to someone who's done it. Like I said, my Twitter is VMIS33. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I'm happy to help.
One little nugget just popped in my mind before we end this episode.
Okay.
It is a little competition called Virtual Design Master.
How did I not talk about Virtual Design Master?
Right, we've been recording for quite a while here. Totally slipped my mind, so why don't you go ahead and speak really quick on VDM?
Sure. So Virtual Design Master is the first, we like to call it, reality-based IT challenge. It does have a very big focus on IT architecture, though we try to add in, flavors of the week, all that kind of stuff. I am the creative director of it, which means I am responsible for the evil challenges the competitors have to do every week. And it's been a really good way to hone my own skills as an IT architect as well as have the contestants hone their skills. It's been really nice to watch people grow. Byron was one of our contestants. Sean Massey were one of our contestants, and they're VCDXs now, just like me. I became a VCDX after doing this for a couple years. So, it's a way for people who can't get that practical experience in IT architecture in their day jobs to kind of get it on the side and get more exposure to it. So you can find us at virtualdesignmaster.io if you're interested. We have all our challenges posted, all our episodes posted. So even if you just want to take a read through what other people are doing or do the challenges for yourself, please feel free and reach out with any questions.
Those who have listened to the show since the start of the podcast are very well aware of Virtual Design Master, and I'm a big proponent of doing it. I grew tremendously on top of
It's fun, isn't it? Even though I'm like mean and nasty and make people suffer, like it was kind of fun, right?
It was a great experience. I learned a ton. I made friends from around the world. I've picked up a lot of recognition from it. I tell people all the time, you need to sign up for this. Get out of your comfort zone and learn and try.
Exactly. It's all about every kind of thing you do to grow in your life. You have to get out of your comfort zone, right? Like I said, my big thing was I had never, other than blogging, right, and technical documents, I had never put something I'd written out to the world like that. I have all these like novels I wrote sitting on my laptop that are never going to see the light of day because I didn't want them to. So to finally take that big step for me, that was a big thing, and it was kind of intimidating at first, but I'm really glad I did it, and I learned a lot from getting out of my comfort zone.
Excellent. Well, once again, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. A parting word of advice: start writing. Writing is a soft skill that can help your career grow. Whether it is documenting your work environment or blogging your personal experiences, you'd be surprised on how much writing can propel your career. If you'd like to join the conversation on today's episode, want to be a guest on the podcast, or have an idea for a future episode, reach out to me on Twitter at ExploreVM, email me, paul@explorevm.com, or contact me on Facebook, facebook.com/ExploreVM. Once again, thank you for listening. So you've got... I started with a so again. I need a thesaurus.